a contrarian, an iconoclast, egomaniac.
The egomaniac bit I just have to live with, but the contrarian I do find a bit suspect. In fact, when I was asked to write a book about the contrarian question, I began by saying what a silly word I thought it was. I thought at least that was in the spirit of the book, that I should begin by trashing my publishers for having the idea. By the way, while I think about it, a guy came up to me at a bookstore in California the other day, an older gentleman, with a copy of that book for me to sign, and said he'd given it to his son, hoping the boy would become a contrarian, but the boy had refused. I thought that was quite funny. Anyway, what I don't like about the term is this. It suggests that one goes looking for a fight just for its own sake, or in order to attract attention to oneself. And I know my shortcomings reasonably well, and I don't think that's one of them. Most of these fights have sort of picked me. I mean, for a long, long time I thought, well, someone must do something about Henry Kissinger. I mean, this is ridiculous, the reputation of this guy as a statesman and so forth. Well, no one else did it, so I thought, all right. Same with Mother Teresa. Couldn't believe no one ever was willing to take a second look at her.
Let me just quickly reintroduce you. Christopher Hitchens is our guest today on Radio Times. We're talking about his new book and his many ideas. The book is called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. A full bank of calls here. We'll get back to our callers after the short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. This is Radio Times here on WHYY in Philadelphia. I'm Marty Moss-Coane. If you're just joining us, Christopher Hitchens is our guest. He's a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, a visiting professor at the New School. He writes book criticism for Atlantic Monthly. You can also read his articles on Slate, and he's the author of a new book, and he's written many of them. This one called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. 1-888-477-9499. That's 1-888-477-WHYY. You write about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in this book, and many people believe, and I think he believed, that religion gave him great sustenance and allowed him to challenge the racism and bigotry and discrimination and segregation and apartheid in this country. How do you see how his religion informed him?
Well, if you remember, when he was alive, before this rather sickly canonization descended on him posthumously, he was regularly and very brutally attacked by the FBI, among others.
Indeed.
For keeping communist and socialist and secularist company, which he did. I mean, he'd studied Marx in school, he'd written about Marx and Hegel. He wasn't a Marxist, but I think he was a social democrat. And indeed, many of his best friends were secular Marxists and leftists, who were a very important part of the civil rights movement. Why? Because you don't need religion to prove that you can't have racial discrimination in voting or housing, or matters of this kind. The case for civil rights has been made overwhelmingly already by black secularists like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, union organizers, tough guys, who actually did arrange the March on Washington. Dr. King's great advantage was he could take the biblical rhetoric that had undergirded slavery and segregation up till then, because there really is justification for racism and slavery in the Bible. There's no justification for civil rights in it. But he could borrow the Exodus story and make it real to people. Well, all right, rhetorically, I would say whatever floats your boat. Don't quote too much Exodus, though, because what Exodus says is you can kill anyone who gets in your way, you can enslave them, you can take their land, you can rape their women, and I'm very glad he didn't take Exodus as anything but with the very lightest of touches. The problem of this insistence that everyone has in awarding the civil rights movement, which was the work of millions of people, many of them non-believers, and as I say, handing it over as if it was a triumph of Christianity, is this. It has since licensed an incredible number of black demagogues and frauds, just because they've got Reverend in front of their name. Do I need to say who? I debated one of them the other day in New York, Al Sharpton. He wouldn't get away with this if he wasn't called Reverend. Same with Jesse Jackson. It's hugely empowered people who have absolutely left black America rudderless and leaderless. So it hasn't been without bad consequences.
No, but getting back to Dr. King himself.
Long chapter on King in my book.
Yes, there is, and it's an interesting one. And at the same time, he drew on both the New and the Old Testament, and they're words of Jesus that you can apply to the civil rights movement or equality. Well, I'm not enough of a theologian to be able to debate that, but at the same time, he thought of himself as a religious person, and that there was room in his world and for religion and for secularism to fight racism in this country.
Fair enough. But it's, as I say, we're now living, and as people have been proving by their phone calls, as I argue in the book, we're living in a time now where religious belief is something completely optional. You can believe it if you like, but it's surplus to requirements. It either proves too much or too little. So that's one of my critiques of it.
Okay. Let me get back to our callers, and we've got, looks like Gavin from Elkton, Maryland joining us. Gavin, go ahead. You're on Radio Times.
Hi.
Hi
Great show.
Thank you.
I'm a Quaker myself, and we're certainly not the only religious group. There's several that include acceptance and tolerance and peace and social responsibility as part of our core beliefs. And I was wondering how we should go about preventing ourselves from being lumped in with those who abuse religion for political gain and for other reasons.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it, Gavin. Go ahead, Christopher.
My daughter goes to the Friends School in Washington, and I'm never sure myself. They never seem quite sure either whether or not Quakerism is a religion. It's some kind of a faith, I understand, and an ethical one. I have very strong disagreement with it because of its preaching of non-resistance to evil, which I regard as an evil doctrine. By the way, since we're in Philadelphia, I mean, anyone listening to this who has not read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin should read the chapter on the Quakers of Philadelphia during the French and Indian Wars. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read.
Well, let's not get too off of a tangent here, because I want you to...
No, I'm not at all on
but
a
I want
tangent.
You to address
I'm showing how seriously I take
asking.
the Quaker question.
But Gavin is saying, how does he separate himself, or do you separate someone who is a Quaker, who believes in tolerance and equality?
As far as I know, Quakers do not preach that they have God's word, that they've had a revelation and that they can therefore legislate morality. So they don't meet my definition of being a religion.
Gavin?
It's like the Unitarians, with whom we say, well, they appear to believe in one God at the most.
Well, I would say that we're an honest religion by saying that we honestly don't know for sure.
Well, you see that you would get the impression, wouldn't you, that agnosticism was sweeping the United States.
But that's your definition of agnosticism,
yes, absolutely.
Because we don't know.
Whoever he is, he's not a religious person, I can tell. I can always tell when people are, by the way.
Gavin, I'm going to give you the last word, and then we have to move on.
Well, I'll just thank you for your response.
Okay. Thank you for the call to Radio Times.
Talk about turning the other cheek.
There you go. Excuse me. Let me get Norm from Norristown to join us. Norm, go ahead. You're on the air.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
You're
I
welcome.
think I've seen all of your guests' recent TV appearances. And to me, my call is the only one that's an antidote to the myths of the Bible and the Quran. And it's that the believers in religion require us to believe that people live here on Earth, on a planet in the solar system at the edge of the Milky Way, in a galaxy of billions of solar systems, in a universe of billions of galaxies, somehow believe that this is the center of the universe. And what happens here overshadows everything. Excuse me. And that's what I'd like to ask them. Do they think beings from another solar system came here would believe the myths of the Bible and the Quran?
Well, no.
I guess that question is out there for you, Christopher.
Well, it's more like a statement, but I mean, I would just amplify it a bit. It's very well put. I say in my book, look, religion does two things. One is it tells people that they're sinners, that they're guilty, they were guilty before they were born, they're originally sinful, that the Quran says made from a clot of blood, the Bible from dust and ashes and earth, in women's case, a rib. But in return for this rather masochistic inculcation, it says, aha, but there's good news. The whole wheeling constellation of the known cosmos is designed with you in mind.
And you see that as contradictory?
From encouraging people to have no self-respect at all. It encourages fantastic self-centeredness. This is all done with you in mind, and God has a plan for you too, if only you'll transfer some of your money to us. I mean, it's enough to make a cat laugh, basically.
Make a cat laugh.
And when you look at it in any kind of perspective of the sort that the gentleman, I thought, rather elegantly summoned just now, you do realize what absolute tripe it is.
Norm, thanks for the call.
Sinister tripe, too.
Thanks for the call to Radio Times. You have written, Christopher Hitchens, in this book, it's difficult to imagine at what point we would need to remind or reassure ourselves that Jesus was born of a virgin, and that would be if...
Oh, I'm quoting someone else there, I should say.
Sorry about that.
I owe that one to Sam Harris.
Oh, Sam Harris, another of your I guess, kindred spirits here.
Yes.
But if a civilization